I thank you for trusting in me as your state representative, and I ask for your vote on November 3rd to elect me to a second term to serve as your state representative. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian. And Rick, we turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Carol, thank you very much, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this important event. Debate between different parties is critical to the success of our government, and when the majority party continues to push ideas without having the opportunity to have opposing viewpoints, it tends to move our towns and our state in a direction that may not necessarily be best for everyone. Connecticut has lagged behind other states in economic growth. We're 47th most expensive state in the nation to live in, and there's a significant amount of burden being placed on small businesses and residents of our towns and states through increased taxes and through increased legislation, which I believe is destructive to our economic growth. We do not attract talent. We do not attract young people to our state. Money is fleeing our state. People are taking their state-sponsored pensions and healthcare and moving to Florida. And there's a lot of issues that I believe are not being addressed with the representative currently representing the 18th district, which is what this is about. It's not about federal issues. And yes, it is about state issues, but it is about West Hartford issues. We have a beautiful campus in West Hartford that's languishing in an unrepaired state that needs to be addressed, that needs to be repaired. We need to have people who are going to fight to restore that property for West Hartford, who are going to stand up to the majority and who are going to be able to speak calmly and effectively, and who are going to be able to try to reason that there are some things that have gone through in the last few years, last couple decades, to be honest with you, that have continued to keep Connecticut low and burden economic growth. I am a property owner. I'm a small business owner, lifelong Connecticut resident, and I see the impact. I travel around the United States, and I see other states that are booming. There's cranes in their cities and growth in their suburbs, and Connecticut has languished. So that's
sorry, time's up.
Time is up. Thanks.
I feel so rude, but you guys are wonderful.
I could keep going, trust me.
Yes. You'll have more opportunity, Rick. So I thank you very much to both of you for that introduction of yourselves to all of the listeners, and for recording for other showings after this event. I'm going to start with something that certainly is commonly known for the League of Women Voters. We are very interested in getting people out to vote, as are you, and do a lot of events and research on voting issues. So during this time of COVID and the legislation that was brought forward to allow everyone to have an application to vote, Connecticut residents are now able to use an absentee ballot and check the COVID thing, which kind of gives us an opportunity to take a look at what does no-fault absentee balloting look like, what does early voting look like. But our Constitution says the voter shall appear in person on Election Day. So we are still working on whether or not the populace wants to see that happen. We have a step one where the majority of the legislature said, okay, let's get that constitutional change in place, and it will be brought before the next legislative session or the next legislative group of the 2 years. I think it's next year, right? So what my specific question is, do you support in-person early voting or expanded use of absentee balloting? And consequently, will you support a required constitutional change in Connecticut? And Rick, why don't we start with you?
Great. In my opinion, everybody needs to cast a vote. I completely support the absentee ballots. I support in-person voting. I think that whatever is necessary to ensure that all votes are cast in a fair and just manner with the most possible security, whatever measures are necessary, There's a lot of people who have a difficult time getting to the polls, and I think that it would actually possibly even save money. Instead of having people drive people to the polls, they could cast an absentee ballot. I'm not in any way worried that the system will be corrupt. I think it's a robust system. It's been occurring in our country since the Civil War. And I think with modern technology and the way that we can control the flow of information, I think it's great. And I support whatever changes are necessary to make sure everyone has an opportunity to vote.
Thank you very much. Jillian?
Thank you, Carol. So during a worldwide pandemic, it is just vitally important that we ensure that people are safe and healthy and can utilize their right to vote. And so I was really proud to vote in the special session to expand absentee ballots, to have the new COVID checkbox. And we saw so many people utilize that change during the primary. We went back in just last week to make additional tweaks to the absentee ballot law to ensure that it goes as smooth as possible in this fall November election. I support both early voting and absentee ballot, expansion to absentee ballot. Was proud to vote in support of a measure that would allow for early voting. And now once the next legislature is sworn in, that needs to be voted on again before there can be a constitutional change. My sister lives in North Carolina, and she has had early voting for years now and describes how during the month leading up to the election, she can go to a convenient polling place of her choosing after work. And so for working families, for a busy community, it just makes sense in our new economy. People cannot take the time 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. to get there on one day. And so we should give folks as much opportunity as they can. This is one of the issues I heard most from constituents in West Hartford, that they wanted to be able to vote absentee. And so I'm proud that we could do that for them in this general election.
Thank you. Certainly one of the topics that's most important for most of the voters is going to be anything to do with budget and the economy coming back. So budget, revenue, taxes, and the influence of COVID-19 on all of that. So I thought I might start by saying that the state of Connecticut, other states have to have a balanced budget, but no one was planning on a pandemic and how to pay for all of that this year. So my question to you is, how do we restart the economy and also balance that with health and safety? And where is the money going to come from, in your opinion? We'll give that to you first, Jillian.
Thank you, Carol. And I think, during a pandemic, we need to start from a place of listening to what public health officials have to say. Connecticut has done a tremendous job in protecting public health. Our COVID numbers are incredibly low. That said, our businesses are struggling and families are really facing difficult economic times. During this pandemic, I've heard from hundreds of constituents who have needed assistance with their unemployment. And so we know that these are very tough days. Connecticut has faced fiscal mismanagement for decades on both the part of Republicans and Democratic leadership. And it was incredibly positive to see us starting to turn around pre-COVID. We were putting things in place and our fiscal house was beginning to get in order. To your point, though, COVID has struck, and we know we're going to be heading into a 2021 session where we're going to face some really difficult fiscal decisions. I'm not running to raise your taxes. I am running to make sure that folks have the services and the supports they need. I think during this pandemic, what we saw is that when folks were struggling, what did they do? They turned to their government. And so what I'd love to see happen is the federal government, which is under Republican leadership, step up and in these unprecedented times, worse than the Great Depression, actually pass some comprehensive legislation that gets states the financial relief they need so we can provide supports to our constituents.
Thank you. Rick?
Great. So there's a significant amount of issues that are facing the state financially. I don't want to get into too many of them. There's a few that I'm familiar with that I'd like to speak directly to. You know, the first thing that we need to do is support our small business owners. Small business is the engine of growth in all states, and especially in Connecticut. Small business owners are absolutely getting damaged by the current governor's policies. I do agree, and it's extremely important, and I'm very proud of Connecticut for how safe I feel when I walk around. The early action by our governor to include masks and social distancing and the closing of schools have been very, very important. And I'm proud. Whenever I talk to people, I'm proud that I'm from Connecticut and I feel comfortable operating around town with a mask on. But there definitely needs to be a lot of support for small businesses because they are being damaged at a rate that many of them will not recover. Additionally, the governor's passed executive orders to limit evictions, which on its surface seems like, you know, a good idea that you don't want to be putting people on the street during a pandemic. Unfortunately, the governor is currently asking landlords, private citizens, to shoulder that burden. I had a phone call today with a woman who's doing the census, and she was talking to me. We just started talking, and she said that she's a landlord in a 3-family home, and one of her tenants hasn't paid rent since March. It's $1,000 a month out of her pocket, and she doesn't have a mortgage. So this is a real cost that's being borne by citizens of our state. I disagree that both sides of the aisle have created economic problems. The state has been run by one side for such a long time that we're moving in a direction that's unsustainable. And I take particular cause against the minimum wage. I know that Jillian was a co-sponsor of that. I think that's going to completely damage our state. I'm a bad guy to make that argument. Everyone's like, oh, how can you be opposed to people making more money? Well, the reality of it is it's costing jobs, it's creating inflation, and it's burdening our small business, and it's creating taxes for the average person. So yeah, I want everyone to make a fair wage. I want everyone to make a living. I have a friend of mine who runs a park and rec department, and her budget is going to increase $15,000 a year every year for the next 5 years because of this minimum wage increase. That's a $75,000 increase on a $750,000 budget. So that's a 10% increase. And I actually called her today because I wanted to get some facts. Her towns that support her, they gave her zero additional money. She has to cut jobs, reduce staff, reduce services in order to make up that budget shortfall. So I think that putting a hold on the minimum wage increases would be a great idea. You know, I'm also particularly opposed. And again, I'm a bad guy for saying this, especially on video in a debate situation. But the paid family medical leave, you know, that's a burdensome tax for our residents. Now, small businesses don't pay those; individual people pay those. For a $60,000 salary, you're going to pay $300 a year towards this paid family medical leave. It's creating burdensome additional governmental oversight. We're adding jobs to the payroll for the state of Connecticut, and the taxpayers are paying for it. So,
hey, Rick, I have a follow-up question to what you're saying. What is your plan to help landlords recoup their lost income?
So that's a great question. The hard answer is that most landlords are not going to recoup that money. That's going to be sunk costs for most of them. You know, the state of Connecticut did put together a $40 million plan called the THRAP program, which is to help people who were impacted, which can give tenants about $4,000 to pay their back rent, which is a great step in the right direction. Unfortunately, the paperwork is very burdensome, and out of the 30,000 applications, only 7,500 people were approved, and only 40 people have actually been funded. So, we've talked to the governor, we've written letters. We think that, maybe, obviously federal help would be great, but that's not forthcoming. At this point, we just want to keep the tenants in place. We want to try to work out payment plans with them. It's a difficult situation.
Jillian, would you like to respond?
I would. Thanks, Carol. There was a lot in there. Thanks, Rick, for your response. I agree that we need to support our small businesses, and we have been. So many small businesses here in the state have received the PPP, and Connecticut early on put out a small business relief fund. Now, was it enough? No. there is tremendous need. And so again, I would look to the federal government to pass some meaningful legislation to get the funds we need here into the state. We have also let up on many regulations here in the state that have allowed businesses to thrive as best they can during this pandemic. And I think going forward, we're going to be able to look at those regulations and make some significant changes that can help businesses going forward. When we talk about the evictions and preventing evictions in the state, I mean, we're talking about people's lives here. We certainly can't put people out on the street during a pandemic. And Rick even mentioned it, the state has enacted rental relief, and the governor just doubled that pool of money last week. I would argue because many of us, including myself, have been pushing on the governor to put more funds towards that. But that's another area that if we were able to get in federal dollars, we could support landlords through that rental relief. Rick mentioned the minimum wage. I stand by that legislation. Yes, we have to think of businesses, but we also have to think of working families. And during the pandemic, what we saw so many things. We learned so many things during this pandemic. But what we saw is that when push comes to shove, the workers we need most are those workers who earn a minimum wage. And so making sure that they can live in a state like Connecticut, where the cost of living is incredibly high, is just invaluable. We need to pay these workers what they're worth. And I would argue a minimum wage is just a starting point. And then finally, paid family and medical leave. I think Rick, with all due respect, is completely wrong there. If we had passed paid family and medical leave 7 years ago, when we first started having the discussion in this state, we wouldn't have been in some of the trouble we've been in during this pandemic. We have seen now more than ever that families need that support when a health crisis hits, when it's an individual health crisis, when it's the health crisis of a loved one, or when it's to care for a new child. And so we certainly need social supports like paid family and medical leave. And so I stand by all those votes, and I can't wait for paid family and medical leave to go into effect in this state. And knocking doors, I've met many individuals who feel the same.
Can I rebut that?
Yep, go ahead, Rick.
So just a couple quick things, and I just want to say that it is hard to make the argument against both of these pieces of legislation because they do on their surface seem to be positive, but really you're not increasing the lowest paid people. You're costing them hours and you're costing them jobs. So there's a trade-off between, I mean, how much can a small business afford between a $10 an hour employee or a $15 an hour employee, right? So either they're gonna raise prices, which creates inflation in our state, which burdens everybody, or they're going to cut hours and cut jobs. So there's two sides of that argument. I'm on the other side of that argument. And then the paid family medical leave, it would have been a complete and utter disaster if people started taking that during COVID. It would have bankrupted the state. Where's all that money going to come from? There's no way that we're going to be able to fund that many people who are going to create that much of a financial burden on the state of Connecticut. I mean, I think it's a great idea. I'm not opposed to the idea. I like the idea, and I think it's an important idea, but it's just too broad. There's far too many ways to fit through loopholes to qualify for that service. So, I mean, again, I don't want to be the bad guy saying I don't support people, because I do. I mean, I'm a landlord. I give a lot of my time and I donate I don't donate to charities. I donate to my tenants and I help them whenever I can. I'm very supportive of my tenants, but we got to be realistic about what we can afford as a state. We can't, I feel like the old father to the kid. Hey, we can't go on vacation. We can't buy a new car. We have to, take care of our money. We have to be careful. And one of the questions you asked earlier was about the how are we going to pay for it. I think that the one good thing about things is that we do have a rainy day fund, and I believe that the state of Connecticut does have around $3 billion that is going to be used up to help us get out of this mess. So
Okay, let's stick with the revenue part of this for a minute. Thanks for bringing that up, because that certainly is a very important part of this particular issue. We have to balance our budget, but you still have to raise money to support all of the things we want to do, many of which have been mentioned today. What kinds of revenue can we add to Connecticut? What revenue streams can we look at? The state income tax, taxes on folks who earn above a certain threshold have been talked about, the corporate tax rate. There are so many different ones. What kinds of revenue streams might you look at? Jillian, why don't we start with you?
So I think it's hard to talk about the opportunities that come out of this pandemic, but when we're talking about revenue, I think it's important to do so. And with Connecticut having such low numbers and such strong leadership right now, there are individuals who are looking to Connecticut as a leader and a place to move to. And so I think as folks want to move out of cities like New York and Boston, Connecticut is becoming an increasingly desirable place to live and work. In particular, as we're seeing this drastic move to remote work, I mean, as we're on a Zoom tonight. So I think that we will see out of this pandemic, additional individuals moving to and living in Connecticut, which will help to increase our revenue. I also think it is long overdue to tie up some of the loopholes that we have in our state with regards to taxes. And that was brought up during my first session in my first term. And there was incredible pushback, but we need to work against that pushback and ensure that there is fair taxation in Connecticut.
Okay, Rick?
So the first thing I would like to say is I don't think that we should tax people anymore. I think we're getting taxed quite a bit in Connecticut. I do agree that because of this pandemic, people are purchasing more real estate in Connecticut. I work in the real estate field, and definitely there's been an inflow of some people. Hopefully, more people coming in than people leaving. People have been moving out of Connecticut for since 2014, and a lot of people are taking their state pensions and health insurance with them to Florida, where they don't have to pay any income tax. So, I'm sure I'm going to alienate all the state workers when I say that I think that if you move out of Connecticut, you should not be able to avoid paying your state income tax on our tax dollars that are paying you your pensions and health insurance. So, honestly, the best way to bring new revenue to the state is to boost our economy, is to attract young, talented individuals who are going to start businesses, who are going to try to develop new areas in the state. So I think building the economy, attracting smart young people, and growing the economy from the bottom up and supporting our small businesses, helping our landlords by really bringing a robust economy that will bring the much needed tax revenue in the form of sales tax and property taxes and all the other things that we live off of. I don't think we should be increasing taxes for anyone at this point. I think we should do our best to try to reduce taxes and to offer, like I said, offer incentives to companies. Back when, this is a little personal information, back when Amazon was coming to the state of Connecticut, I was so excited. I actually called up the state of Connecticut Department of Economic Development, and I was like, I want to help. What can I do? And they're like, well, what are you good at? And I was like, well, I was an English major, I could write. And they're like, great, do you want to write some marketing material for the state? And I was like, sure, well, what do you have? What can I work on? I'm like, well, we don't have anything. I'm like, you don't. So right, I mean, so there was the whole state of Connecticut Department of Economic Development, the marketing material that they produced to try to attract businesses to Connecticut was post the HQE2 for Amazon. So there's a lot of ways to attract, to increase revenue, and none of them should be involved with taxing our residents.
So Rick, I have a follow-up question for both of you. Can you clarify how the PFML, paid family medical leave, would be funded and is funded?
I mean, I think
I can jump in.
I can answer that. I think probably Jillian would be more qualified, but let me just give you my understanding of it, because and then Joey can rebut my response. But from what it's a 0.5% payroll tax. So every single worker in Connecticut who works in a company that has one employee is going to be paying 0.5% of their income into a state fund, which is going to then hire new people to administer it. So it's 0.5%. It's not it does add a little bit of red paperwork for the payroll companies that run the payroll. It's not a burden on small business. It's a direct tax on our residents of our state.
Jillian? Thank you.
So I don't see it as a direct tax. I see it as a much needed social support that people were calling for and continue to call for. And yes, it is a minimal percentage out of everyone's paycheck in the state of Connecticut. For individuals who are self-employed, they can self-select to actually contribute to the pool. And then they'd be able to tap into that pool when they need time out of work to care for a sick or aging loved one, to care for themselves if they have their own sickness, or to take care of a new child. It is absurd that we are in 2020 and we still don't have paid maternity or paternity care. We're seeing businesses, large and small, in this state and across this country, moving in that direction and offering their workers this much needed time out of work. And so the cost that individuals will put into this program, studies have been done, and it shows that the pool will be viable. And individuals can take that time either in one 12-week amount of time, or they can take it over a certain amount of time as they work that out with their employer. So for example, if you have an aging loved one who is suffering with Alzheimer's, you would be able to take maybe 1 or 2 days per week paid. I mean, again, we are seeing the need for this so dramatically during the pandemic when folks need time out of work and are just struggling financially because they are not getting that pay that they need while they have to take that time.
Thank you. Rick, do you have something additional?
I'd like to rebut. So it is a tax. It's direct tax on every single working person in the state. A person who earns $60,000 a year will pay $300 a year out of, that's what that equates to approximately. And I think it caps out at 132,000 or something. But not only that, so they're allowed 12 weeks a year. So you could have 12 weeks paid every single year. So, you know, working in the industry that I work in and knowing what I know about people's needs, there's absolutely no doubt whatsoever that people need more money. I mean, that's a sort of a silly argument. Everybody could take advantage of it. The problem is if we had that system in place for this pandemic, well, first of all, it's paid family medical leave. So you wouldn't, I guess if somebody was sick, right, it would absolutely bankrupt our state. If we didn't have enough money in that, and I didn't do the numbers, right? So I don't know how much it's going to take in revenue, how much it's going to cost, how many jobs we're going to have to create, which is a good thing and a bad thing. They're going to be state jobs with pensions and retirement funds that we're going to have to fund. So there's a cost to operate that system, and then there's a cost to pay it out when it comes up. So it's just, I think that there's some good parts of it, but I think in general it's a burdensome process. And yes, I don't want to come across as somebody who's not supportive to the workers, because really that's what I do most. I just don't think it's the right time for that program, and it's certainly not written well. I read it today. I actually read the entire bill, and it's not written well.
Carol, I'd like to jump in and respond. So the majority of working families in Connecticut are actually one paycheck away from bankruptcy. And so to put in $300 or less a year when a crisis might strike at any moment, I mean, you can't plan for cancer. You can't sometimes plan for an aging loved one to get ill. And so to invest that $300 can actually save many families from going into bankruptcy. And when Rick says that, people can get 12 weeks each year, they can't. You actually have to qualify for the program, and that is written into the bill and will be monitored. And so just like the current FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, which is unpaid, you can't just take it. So individuals will need to qualify. And so that's misinformation that's put out there that folks would take 12 weeks each year.
I just got one quick rebuttal, simple, real quick.
Okay.
And again, Jillian, I think we're not too far apart on it, but I think it's really important that in order to understand the issue, you really need to be in the trenches and you need to see the people. And I think the problem is not the good people, right? I mean, that's never the problem. And it's similar to governor's executive order about the eviction moratorium. It's not the good people who need the help. Those people are getting help from their friends, from their family, from their landlords, right? It's the people who take advantage of the system. That's what's going to cause the problems in our state. And anybody who doesn't know that there's a huge amount of poverty in Connecticut, in our cities, and people who are going to absolutely take advantage of this program, I think that's naive to think that, because obviously the people who have cancer and the people who have babies, I fully support it, you know, but again, do you want to pay $300 or $600 a year? I mean, I have to pay all sorts of taxes and all, and you know, just another thing. Do I want to join a Winding Trails for $700, or do I want to pay family medical leave for $700? I don't know. I'm just saying that's kind of maybe not a good example, but it's just sort of an equal cost type of thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you both for your input on that. I think that there's another question, Cassie, before we got any more lead questions. You have something that's new for us?
Right. So I don't even know why we haven't talked about this yet, but COVID. We have a few questions about COVID that I think would take 24 hours to fully respond to, but I'm going to share them with you and let you two decide how would you like to answer these. So the first is that the legislature has been embroiled in a debate over vaccinations. In light of COVID-19, where do you stand on removing non-medical exemptions from vaccinations in public schools? And then the second question that is also COVID-19 related is, given the uptick in the cases in West Hartford, what would you do to address this uptick that the governor is not already doing?
All right, Jillian, start with you, please.
Great, thank you for the question. So not that we needed COVID-19 to tell us this, but the pandemic certainly has illustrated how important vaccines are to the public health. And when we're talking about public schools, we need to think about the greater good and ensure that students, families, and teachers are safe. And so if someone has a medical reason not to get a vaccine, so be it. But I do support eliminating anything non-medical, any non-medical exemptions when it comes to vaccines for our public schools. And then with the uptick, it is certainly concerning. Now, Connecticut and our community is still much better off than many other places in the country. That said, the uptick is of concern. And so, you know, I think our schools are doing an incredibly great job. I think that the mask wearing on a whole, folks in our community are doing a really great job there. It's a great question. I think it's just continuing to monitor. I'd love to know more about the data at the college campuses here in our community. We do have 2 college campuses in West Hartford, and so I wonder how that plays a role in this uptick. But maybe more stringent local oversight of the wearing of masks, and maybe we hold off on expanding how many individuals can be in a public setting. I know that that's of concern because our businesses are struggling, and as we head towards cooler temperatures, there won't be as much outdoor eating, but I do think we have to continue to put the public health first.
And Rick.
So first thing I'd like to say, and I already said this earlier, I'm very pleased and proud of the way that Connecticut has handled everything so far. I do feel safe when I go out. And I know that the incidents of COVID are there, and we have had some upticks. They're very, very small. I don't believe in taking risks, so I'm going to always wear my mask and try to be as careful as possible. The issue with the vaccine is a big one, and I've talked to some of my not my constituents because I don't hold an office, but people in the 18th district who are really concerned. I mean, I did a lot of research on it, and there's really no evidence to prove that that vaccines cause any negative impacts at all. But I think the argument really needs to be made that placebos don't do anything either, but people get cured because of placebos, right? So I think there's a psychological component to this that is extraordinarily powerful. I've met people who believe wholeheartedly that that vaccines have given their children some negative consequence. I've talked to doctors, I've done research on it, and again, there's no evidence to support it, but I believe that there's got to be the ability to opt out. I think a 75% herd immunity is more than sufficient. From what I understand, I'm not a doctor, but I think that the choice needs to be left there for people, just because it's so powerful, and you're just going to not be able to force people. You're going to deny them their constitutional right to a fair education because they're morally or psychologically or religiously opposed to a vaccine, which may or may not help them or may hurt them. Again, I don't want to suggest that it will, because I don't believe that'll hurt them. But yeah, so that's it for me on that.
All right, thank you. Well, in dealing with this uptick in, we have students at school, we have students in daycare, we have parents who have not been able to afford to bring their children back to daycare. There are parents that have their children still learning at home. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts for how to support parents who need daycare and can't afford it. How do we support our schools if the amount of money continues to build that is needed, the amount of money increases that is needed to provide all the protective equipment? So we'll start with that, and then I have a follow-up to that. If you would just start with that, and Rick, if you'd like, you may start.
All right. So, that's it. Are you guys hearing feedback? All right. So if I had the answer to that question, I'd probably be running for a different office than 18th District.
There you go.
That's a tough question. My brother is impacted by it. He has two young children, a first grader and a fourth grader, and he doesn't come to work on days because he has to stay home and take care of his kids, and he actually has to administer educational material to them. He actually has to be their teacher. So it's a big problem. I don't have a good solution for it. I'm willing to, talk to people and try to figure out what a good solution is. I mean, money solves a lot of problems, but money is not an unlimited resource. We do need to support parents. Daycare is extraordinarily important. I'm also, I'm a commissioner of the MDC, and we had a meeting. We were talking about how we could try to solve the problem for the employees of the MDC who needed to have daycare. And they actually came up with, a room where we have enough distance and enough people. And so people are talking about it. People are trying to solve problems. I think that that the employers may want to try to wade into that discussion. I think they're probably the ones that have a lot at stake in it. As far as, taking care of the schools and the PPE, I mean, clearly the state needs to step up and support the schools and provide funding for the PPE. I mean, it's the state regulations that are creating the burden. Obviously, we all want to be safe, but I believe that state money is probably going to be the solution. And the reason I think that as well, that the towns are going to be absolutely destroyed with their property tax collection. I think there's a lot of people who are having a hard time paying their mortgages. They're maybe not paying their property taxes. And they're already stretched budgets, trying to overcome their own issues in the town halls and working remotely and doing all the things that the towns are doing. So it's a big problem. Hopefully the state, that $3 billion rainy day fund will help go to help some towns with that stuff.
Thank you, Rick. Jillian.
This is another one of these issues that when I'm out speaking with constituents or at my daughter's soccer game or my son's baseball game, every parent wants to talk about, which is what's going on with the schools. The pandemic hit just so instantly, and immediately our lives changed dramatically. As of October, 800,000 women have left the workforce. So we're seeing the toll that this pandemic and children being out of school and families having to balance working from home and taking care of children is having on people. And unfortunately, it is having a negative, more so negative impact on women. I think we've all gained even greater respect for teachers during this pandemic and what they do on a daily basis to not only educate our children, but to care for them. And so they are our primary source of childcare at the same time that they are educating our future citizens. And so thank you to the teachers. And so I do think we need to continue to lead with public health because we need to protect our children, families, and teachers. That said, I think there are some things that we could be doing better. I did seek to serve on the Appropriations Committee and the Education Committee, primarily because in my role as a state representative, I really have authority over budget. You know, we have a very well-oiled Board of Ed here in West Hartford, and we have an amazing school system. But what I can do as a state representative is try and get funds in. And so certainly we're going to be looking at those dollars and how do we get more funding to our public schools. But again, I would look to the federal government to do their job and to get us more relief dollars. These are unprecedented times, and this is a time worse than the Great Depression. And so we really need support from the federal government so that we can help then at the state level to get those supports to the schools. The final piece I'll say is I think we need to be more creative. And so right now, unfortunately, we're seeing the educational divide and the economic divide expand, and it was already significant in the state of Connecticut. And so families who have the means are able to pay for private childcare or private kind of daycare programs right now when their kids are at home remotely learning, and families who don't have the financial means cannot. And when I'm knocking on doors, I am always so moved by the folks in our district because I meet with families who are saying to me, listen, I'm doing okay. I'm making it work, but I'm concerned about my neighbor, you know, 2 streets over who doesn't have the means to be able to get in-home care for their children or to be able to pay for a pod with other kids. And so I'd like to see Connecticut invest in giving some funds to families so that they can pay for some much needed childcare while this remote learning continues.
Yes, you've touched upon a lot of the issues that are spinning around, one of them being the remote learning and parents having to be teachers as well as workers. I'm wondering if either of you, if both of you can try to be a little creative yourselves or at least take us in some kind of direction of what the legislature might be able to do to help close the digital divide that's been very clear during this time, this pandemic time. So Rick, let's start with you. Any ideas that might be worthwhile for the legislature to address this issue?
Going strictly on creativity here because I haven't given this too much thought up until this moment, but I would say that the first item that I would talk about might be some sort of Wi-Fi neighborhood hotspot that people who qualified could hook up to and save a bunch of money every month on their Wi-Fi bill. I think that certainly not only would we should provide more, maybe 5G. There's all that new 5G coming out. Maybe the state could provide some 5G hotspots so people could log in remotely. I know that a lot of towns are providing the Google Chrome books and all that stuff. So, I don't really have a great grasp of that problem. It's not something I spend a lot of time thinking about. So I think maybe just the best solution I could come up with might be some free Wi-Fi for everybody.
All right. Jillian.
So since the pandemic started, I've held a weekly call with parents and advocates of children with special needs because when remote learning started, not only was it challenging for most families, it was particularly challenging for families of children with special needs. And so when we are thinking about what we can do to help with this digital divide, we have to think about low-income families and families who have children with special needs. And so I do think internet access is one of the critical pieces. I hear from my colleagues across the state that there are struggles in very rural communities, but then also in communities where there's lower incomes. And so if there is a way that we can get connectivity across the state, I think that would be tremendous. Parents need training as well as students. And so when we first went remote, parents were then expected to understand all of these systems that they'd never used to be able to help their students. Same thing with teachers. The training levels across the state vary. West Hartford's been doing a fantastic job, but we definitely need more training for parents and the students. We need to understand what are the best practices for remote learning. Can a student sit in front of a computer from 8:30 to 2? I know that my daughter, when she's sitting in front of the computer, listening to her teacher for a half hour, I have to poke her a few times and say, stop chatting on the comments, you got to pay attention. So I think we need to better understand what are best practices for remote learning and then implement them across the state. Connecticut is so unique in that we have so many individual towns that take ownership over education. And I think we really, at this point in time, need to look at that. We need to, having that individual control in this pandemic is meaning that there is discrepancy in the learning that's taking place. And so I think we've come to a place in Connecticut where we can no longer just put out recommendations and guidelines. We actually have to put out requirements. So we need to start to look at what are the best practices, and then how do we measure those practices across the state when it comes to remote learning?
All right, I have another question for you all that it's like COVID. Why are we not talking about this already? If either of you is elected, you would, and going forward represent an incredibly diverse community. Since the death of George Floyd, what have you done to address racial inequality?
Was the question, what have you done or what will you do?
What have you done
Okay.
since George Floyd's death?
Who would you like to go first?
Oh, that's up to Carol. I'm not in charge.
Okay, Jillian, go ahead.
Okay, great. This is part of what makes these some dark times in our country's history, and yet, out of dark times, we can see quite a bit of change and positive change. And so, yes, a huge benefit of West Hartford is that we are such a diverse community. And the community of West Hartford has declared racism a public health crisis, which I think is amazing. But in so doing, we are committing to taking action. And so I myself, since that's the question, I have individually challenged myself to better understand racism, institutional racism, the privilege that I hold, and how I can better understand that privilege and step up and be an ally. I've brought my children to events with masks on to better understand what is going on in our community, in our state, and in our world. And I think it is incumbent on all of us who are parents to educate our white children so that they can understand where all of this is coming from and how they can be a better ally going forward. The reality is that Black Americans are being killed across this country, and that in Connecticut, Black residents are stopped by the police at higher numbers. And so I was incredibly proud to stand up and vote on police accountability measures at the state legislature that enact much needed training that are going to be able to allow police forces to fire bad apples. Right now they were struggling with that, and to give individuals who have had their rights violated an opportunity to seek justice here in the state. And so this is just the beginning. I think we also need to look at racial discrimination and institutional racism in our schools, in our housing policies, in our healthcare systems. And so I am, as a state representative, if elected, will continue to fight this fight.
Thank you. Rick?
So as a private citizen, I don't have too much opportunity to do much on a level that would influence anyone other than myself and my children and my family. One thing that I did do proactively, I did take my children to the Black Lives Matters rally in West Hartford Center. I spent time talking to them about the movement, about what the movement represents. My daughter actually just the other day was asking me questions is what does Black Lives Matter represent? I was able to explain to her a lot about what it is and how it is an important idea. I also had a very difficult conversation with my children about Jim Crow laws, which I'm 51 years old, and to be honest, and I almost embarrassed that I was not aware of how the Jim Crow laws actually were around until the 1960s in the South. So I think that's it's really important that we continue to educate people as to the severity of the issue and how prevalent it is. And it's not something that was in the Civil War. This is something that happens now in the South and in the Midwest. There was a great article in the Hartford Courant last weekend about a young man, a UConn Law School student who drove across the country who was discriminated against because he had, dumped Trump and Hillary Clinton stickers, and he was attacked and I don't know if he was physically attacked, but he was certainly verbally accosted. So I think education is the important lesson in showing our children and teaching them that there's issues out there. One other thing I just want to quickly add is I do not support the defund the police movement. I think that we need to maybe reallocate resources to different areas, but I think that whole idea sends the wrong message. Our police officers are the most valuable line of defense, and the training that they receive is very difficult to go through. And I think that maybe there's some sensitivity training or some other training in there that would be relevant to helping them to do their jobs. But, don't judge anybody until you walk a mile in their shoes. When you're faced with a life or death situation and you have someone who you think is pulling a gun on you, it's very hard for you to try to say, oh, you should have done this or you should have done that. Put yourself there and then judge, right? So I don't like to judge people. So I don't think that's really important that we do not defund the police, but that we reallocate funds to help them, to send social workers instead of police officers with guns or stuff like that. So anyway, that's it for me. Thanks.
I think you both made some very good points for your personal lives. I'm going to take it one step further. Because as a legislator, you might have some opportunity to take next steps in addressing the rights of our residents, whether they be young, old, people of color, LGBTQ communities. What might be a priority for you as a legislator? Who would like to go first? Doesn't matter. All right. So you just finished talking, Rick. I'll turn it to Jillian, if you would, unless you want to start.
Sure. Thank you. On my priority list is looking at the inequities in healthcare. And so I have the opportunity to serve as the chair of the Women and Children Subcommittee on the Medical Assistance Policy Oversight Committee. And so I'm looking to expand Medicaid coverage for maternity care. In the state of Connecticut, we have some of the nation's highest maternal mortality rates for women of color, Black women and Latino women. And so that is an area I would like to focus on. I'll also be working with colleagues to try and eliminate discriminatory crisis pregnancy centers, which go after women who are seeking reproductive health care, in particular, women of color. And I do intend to work with my colleagues in the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus on policies, like I mentioned earlier, that can address the racial, institutional racism that we have in our housing policies and in our educational systems.
Thank you. And Rick, please. What legislative initiatives might you want to work on to address rights of our population?
That's a good question. So, my focus throughout this entire campaign has been mostly economic issues on small businesses and landlord-tenant issues. I think that one of the things that I would like to really focus on would be affordable housing. I think that the state has a significant lack of affordable housing. And I think that a lot of the legislative red tape that exists creates additional cost burdens to developers that make it much more expensive to create housing. So I think the eviction issue and the homelessness issue and the affordable housing would probably be my top priorities.
Thank you. We have, I think, just about come to the end of the discussion time that we allocated, but I would like to give you each an opportunity to spend a minute or so on this last question. If there was anything that you wanted to talk about today that has yet to be asked, this is your opportunity to raise an issue that is most important to you, especially if we have not addressed it today. There are so many other questions I could have asked you that I have on my list, but you know, we are at that point to finish up. So Jillian, why don't you start?
Thank you, Carol, and again, thank you for the opportunity. And Rick, it was a pleasure getting to engage with you tonight in this format. Before serving in the legislature, I was an advocate for years, and I've worked on a number of issues here in the state. And some of the issues that weren't brought up tonight are gun violence prevention. We even, you know, in light of the pandemic, I think we are not able, maybe as a population, to focus on some of the most trying issues that we face. But gun violence prevention is an issue that's near and dear to my heart that I'll continue to work on if elected. Environmental justice and ensuring that we can address climate change and certainly gender-based violence, which is where I started my work in the state of Connecticut. So those are some of the issues that I look forward to working on if elected again to the 18th State House seat. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian. Rick, you have the last word.
All right. I just want to say thank you very much. This has just been great. Jillian, you're a friend of mine, and I've known you for a long time, and I think you're a great person, and I've enjoyed debating you as well. You know, just, I think we've covered a lot of topics. I don't have anything specific. Again, I come from a business background, and I think we've really spoken about most of the issues. I do want to just say that I do not support the tax on ammunition. That does not prevent gun violence. That taxes sportsmen and people who shoot, for target practice. So I don't think that's a great idea. I think that we need to streamline government. I know that it's a great idea to help people, and that we but I think there's a limit to how much taxes we can, put onto our population to support too many of these issues. So, I don't want to seem like I'm not a supporter of the social welfare system, because I'm very, very deep in it. My sister-in-law has special needs. I'm a landlord. I see tenants who have trouble paying their rent. So, I think we've done a great job today. I think we've touched on a lot of the issues, and I think this was a great event. I really appreciate the opportunity.
As a follow-up to what you said, Rick, this will be on YouTube.
Yep.
So it's so much easier to watch it on YouTube nowadays than people who didn't show up live. So everyone, please tell your 18th state district friends that this is on YouTube.
Yep.
You took the words right out of my mouth there.
I'm just so excited.
Good for you.
Such a good
And perhaps we could have Jennifer type in the code if she has it handy to allow people. But generally, you can go to WHCTV.org to get onto the station's website, and you should be able to find the YouTube there. So that may be an easy way to describe it. So I want to thank you both very much for being here with us. I think this was a very good discussion of many, many issues, and thanks to the audience for the questions that were submitted. We hope that this has served a purpose for the 18th District. We will certainly try to advertise the fact that it is going to be available through the whole month of October for people to view. So share that information with your constituents, and we will also be sharing it with the people that we have access to in our distribution lists, and publicize it on a couple of media platforms, I guess is the right word. So in closing, thank you again to all of the production staff at WHC TV and to Jennifer for the hard work she puts into this, to Cassie and to Libby for sending her timing results to us. You guys went back and forth very well, and that worked fine for us today. When it is time to vote on November 3rd, I hope all of our citizens in West Hartford will go and take advantage of that civic right and responsibility. Anyone that does not know for sure whether they are registered or up to date can go to myvote.ct.gov/lookup to find out if they are in the database for your town registrars. Share the fact that this is an opportunity for your fellow citizens to find out if they are registered, and also to encourage them to tune into this debate, which I think was a fine example of what should happen in a democracy. So I thank you all again very much on behalf of the League of Women Voters and WHCI. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.